And good morning, everyone. Welcome to our using culturally responsive picture books to promote language and literacy development for Ells in grades 4 to 8. We're very pleased again to have Dr. Nancy Cloud, Professor Emerita from Rhode Island College, be our presenter for this morning. She, as you probably already know, is a fabulous wealth of information and an absolutely fantastic presenter, and we're very, very pleased to have her work with us again today. And now, Nancy, take it away.
Okay. Oh, I see. Okay. Sorry, I must have been muted. Well, we're very happy that you're here. Thank you so much, because we know it's a beautiful day. I'm sure all of you want to be outside, and we'll make sure that we end on time so that you can have a fantastic afternoon out in the sun. And so, as Ron mentioned, we'll be talking about using culturally responsive literature. And the purpose of using this literature is to foster inclusion and promote equity. So, we'll be talking about all of the rationale of why we have to do something to add more books into our ELA curriculum. Once we talk about the why, then we'll talk about how to select texts with equity in mind, criteria that we need to have, and also checklists that we can use to look at our books, make sure that they're really of high quality. We'll spend 1 minute just thinking about all the things that are involved in reading so that our Ells can be successful readers. And this does certainly involve language development, oral language development. It's not just about reading skills and strategies. We will work with a lesson planning template that helps us identify all the possible language and literacy development objectives once we've selected a really high quality picture book, because our picture books are not going to come necessarily with all of the teaching objectives. Some do have teacher's guides, but I thought we might want to have our own independent planning template so we can think about all the things that matter when we're working with a book with Ells, and making certain that we're really accomplishing our language development objectives and literacy development objectives. I've selected, knowing who signed up for today, I selected some realistic and historical fiction picture books that represent the language communities that you see listed there. These are our primary language communities, and certainly not the only ones in New York City, but we want to be sure that we've at least represented these high incidence language groups that make up New York City classrooms. And if you're looking for a book for another group and you let me know, I'll certainly be happy to hunt with you, or maybe I already know of something. We can't look at every book, so the books that we're looking at today will just serve as models of the type of book that we're looking for, but we will represent all of those language communities that you see. Then we're going to talk about all that our texts offer in terms of social and emotional learning, because we know that this is really critical for our kids right now. They are going through a really rough time, and so are we, as we deal with the pandemic. So we definitely want to make all the possible connections with our students' lives and experiences, because that is going to empower them so that they can share what's on their mind and also get support. We also will we'll look a little bit today at some helpful technology in case we are delivering these books remotely. And so we'll take a look at the kinds of technology tools that might be useful to us. And then I will share, for every title that I show you, print and multimedia teaching resources that you could use if you were to decide to use any of the books that we'll take a look at today. Okay, so I'm hoping to give you a lot of, not just mention books, but also help you have a lot of material should you want to teach that book. And as always, we have a Padlet for this professional development. We tried to get you to download the handouts in advance, but if if for any reason you did not do that, it's really critical that you download the handouts because we will be using them as we go along. And as we always do, we will send you a link to this PowerPoint that I'm showing you right now after the professional development is over, so that you can just relax knowing that you will be given access to the slides. And we are making a recording. And so should you want to hear any certain part again, you would be able to skip around in the recording and get to listen to whatever it is that you'd like to listen to again another time. And at the end, I will give you one slide that shows the tech tools that I'll be sharing today, and another slide that shows you the books that I'll be sharing with you. And I also loaded that as a handout onto the Padlet so that you will have all the names of the books and links that go along with those books, if you should want to use them. And of course, I do want to mention that it's important for you to use the public library to get a copy of the book if you don't have it in your school, or to urge either if you have like a media specialist or a librarian or the principal, you might urge that these be bought for you by the school. I really want to encourage you to not spend your own money and to get those resources into your classroom using funds that are available. And it could be that with COVID, there are extra funds to help you purchase and extend, purchase books to extend your library and give kids access to more culturally responsive books. So we also want to let you know that at the top of the screen, this is just somebody else's screen, but it shows you at the very top of your screen, you should see this view options. And if you would like to have the slides separate from whoever is speaking, you can scroll down and click on the side-by-side mode, and that will put the PowerPoint to the left and whoever is speaking to the right. Okay? So that's kind of housekeeping. And now we want to get into why should you do this? Why should you expand the texts that are in use in your classroom to include more culturally responsive literature? And so, believe it or not, 2018 is the latest release of this type of data from the School of Education at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. They do try to compile through their Cooperative Children's Book Center. They try to keep track and give us the ratio of books in children's books, which of course goes through middle school, what percentage of them represent each specific community. And so here they're talking about the characters that are depicted in the books. And you can see that it's still the case that even animals and other types of characters, so like ghosts and so forth, make up a larger percentage of characters in children's books than African American, Asian Pacific, Latinx, and Native people. And it's still the case that a preponderance of books deal with, have as their characters white individuals. And so we're working in a very diverse setting in New York City, and we have to do something to make sure that we change that ratio. So one of the things that the Metro Center at NYU did was they put out this primer for policy and practice on culturally responsive education. I've given you the link down here. And this particular quote comes from page 19. And they're talking about culturally relevant teaching, culturally responsive education, and culturally sustaining pedagogies. Those are three different terms. The reason that we have them is because we're trying to make our curriculum more inclusive and also focus on the assets of our diverse student populations. We want to connect with their languages and their cultures. Those are assets that they bring into the classroom, and we want to make use of them. And so I'll just say right here that the people that prefer this latter term, culturally sustaining pedagogies, are making the point that kids come to school with their cultural knowledge, and we should be sustaining that. We're not trying to convert them to be something else. And even when they add other cultural understandings and they understand mainstream US culture, if there is such a thing, yes, there is, we still want them to sustain their original culture and we want to build on it. So just being culturally responsive for the people that like this second term, culturally sustaining, they're stressing the fact that we should be really affirming and sustaining who our learners are, not just responding to them. Okay, and so culturally responsive teaching involves all of the things that you see in the orange color. The environments that you set up, have you set up a learning environment that's comfortable for your learners based on their cultural expectations? What about the curricula overall? And what about your instructional methods? Are you using teaching methods that are really responsive to who your kids are? They should all validate and reflect the diversity, the identities, and the experiences of all of your students. You know who's in the room, you know what their backgrounds are, and so you're in the best position to make sure that you're analyzing this and responding to it. And when we do this, we raise the rigor, but we also send a really strong message to our kids that we value them and that multiculturalism, bilingualism, biculturalism, multilingualism, multiculturalism is an asset. Okay, so I like this quote. This comes from understood.org. So I'm always giving you the links if you want to look at it further. And one of the things that the Metro Center did, in addition to creating that primer, they also created a scorecard that we could use to look at our curriculum, and they applied it to the major curricula that were being used in New York City in 2019. And what you can see here is a page where they looked at the diversity of the characters, and they did a better job because they did Middle Eastern, Native American, racially ambiguous, multiracial, people with disabilities. And they also included animals, which I think is really interesting that everybody has to include that. And then they did a diversity of authors tally, same groups. And then they decided what, in terms of gender identity, how were people identifying as girl, woman, boy, man, or non-binary? And they kept track of all of that, okay? And here's what they found. This was in 2018 that they were using the checklist. And they found that while New York City students made up only 15% in 2018 were white, when it came to the Scholastic Elementary Book List, the Teachers College Reading and Writing Program, and Pearson Ready Gen, you can see how preponderant it was that the story authors were white, and it was not matching up at all. And when you look at African American and Black kids, you can also see how different it was in terms of who the authors were and who the kids were. And look at this for Latinx kids and for Asian kids. I mean, this is really something. Now, after they did this, of course, all of these programs tried to improve. They were shocked, I'm sure, and they were trying to improve. So there might have been some slight improvements, but it hasn't changed a lot. And this is what we have to keep track of as teachers. And so here again, the story cover characters, same thing, they did a little bit better in each category. But it was still white authors writing books about Black kids and Latinx kids and Asian kids. And they found that of the 1,200 books that they analyzed, 1,000 were by white authors. But yet you can see that white students only represent 15% of New York City population. This is the same picture as a bar graph. But why I'm here is because I just wanted to stress they're finding that research shows very clearly that when kids see themselves and their experiences in the curriculum, they achieve at higher levels. And more importantly, they become more academically engaged and motivated. And we certainly need that now with the hybrid teaching and the remote teaching. And that while white students are immersed in positive and varied depiction of white children, adults, and families throughout their elementary school learning, students of color are denied the same experience. And so this should really impress us as teachers, and we should be saying, well, I'm going to do something about that. I can change that by the book choices that I add. And I'm going to be on the lookout for books that really do reflect the kids sitting in front of me. And as many of them as I can add, I'm going to add. And there's always room to add for independent reading. There's always room to add for reading groups. And I think there's always room to add, especially a picture book, because they're not lengthy. There's always room to add a picture book into every unit that we teach, if not more than that. And I'm an ex-middle school teacher, and if I were still teaching kids, I would make sure that I had a picture book that really connects with my kids cycling in like every 4 weeks, at least every 4 weeks, because I want them to feel that the curriculum is theirs and it respects them and it affirms who they are. And in fact, this book, which is More Mirrors in the Classroom, written by Jane Fleming and her colleagues. Jane is the director of literacy in Chicago Public Schools. And Chicago is equally diverse, maybe even more diverse, although it's hard to imagine, than New York City, but it has different populations than New York City in abundance, like Polish speakers. And what Jane found was in her research was that actually in this concept of mirrors and windows, that books are either mirrors reflecting back on my life and my experience and my family, or they're windows allowing me to see the experiences of others. And of course, in school, the windows are going to be more plentiful than the mirrors. But she found in her research in Chicago that mirrors have more power than windows, and that mirrors are more important than windows, and that we really need to get those mirrors, those mirror books, into our classroom because they hold a lot of power for language and literacy development. And we want that power. We want that power behind us. So I'm going to have you listen to an elementary teacher, and never mind that she is a second, third grade teacher. What her points are not restricted to her grade levels. And so what I want you to be doing as you listen is to jot down some points that you would like to repeat, because we are going to enter some points into the chat after you've listened. Okay, so you should be taking notes as you're listening of things that when you hear it, you go, oh, that's so important. And I want to repeat that in the chat because I want to make sure that we're all really thinking about that. Okay, so let's take a listen.
This made Grace sad for 2 reasons. She didn't like Natalie, and she didn't have a daddy of her own. Is he clear? Grace felt less and less like being the pink and floaty kind of princess. She couldn't imagine making. I think windows and mirrors is a nice metaphor to explain the importance of students seeing themselves in text and then students learning about others through text. Touch your nose if your dad doesn't live with you. Yeah, me too. Text selection is really important, and I think when students can see just even the slightest connection, they're so excited.
Reach Academy has seen an increase in diversity. We're seeing students from all over the world. Many of our families have been impacted by trauma. We need high-quality teachers in Title I schools that really believe in our children and their capacity to learn and not just look through a deficit lens.
I've known I wanted to be a teacher since I was in 2nd grade. For me, I wanted to be that teacher who looked like my students, who understood the struggle of what it means to be a smart little Black girl. When I was little, I loved to read. As I got older, I wanted to see myself reflected in stories because I started to become more aware of my own identity. So our question this morning is, what is your favorite book that we've read this year and why?
My Father's Beautiful Daughter, because it made me learn about new cultures. My favorite book is Crown because I can relate to it. Okay, mi favorito libro es el.
So many of our families, they feel invisible in this society. They haven't been seen. They haven't had a voice. And how do we ensure when they walk through the doors of Reach Academy that they feel like they are somebody, that they are important?
It's really important that students see themselves in all aspects of their classroom and feel valued and respected. It's also really important to foster this understanding of others so that when they grow up, they are able to work with all different kinds of people.
We live in a world now where we have to build alliances across differences.
I agree.
All right, you are gonna get to create a character today. Somebody that you wish was in a story. So what is their hair like? Is it like yours or is it different than yours?
When I first came to this school, I didn't have any friends, and I'm like, I wanna make her just like me.
Okay, so maybe one of the reasons why I love teaching is watching those aha moments in students. Sometimes it's just watching them get excited about something. It's really heartening to see students who may be judged for so many things be these brilliant little people who are gonna one day run the world.
I want this character to exist because I want a character to be like me because I'm smart and brilliant and awesome.
Okay, so I asked you to concentrate on things that impressed you and think about the ideas that were just shared in that video and type one statement or point worth repeating into the chat, but don't hit enter till I tell you to. So just go ahead and type, but don't hit enter. And in 1 minute, I will tell you to hit enter. And then Xiomara is going to just read the ones that we have time for to kind of share some of the things that you're putting there. So I don't know why we're viewing Charles Lowry's screen.
Let me stop that. Okay.
Do I need
Okay,
to share again?
Yeah, you should share again, Nancy.
Okay, so let's go ahead and hit enter. And Xiomara, this is going to come at you quick, but just try to read some of them to us.
Hi, Nicole. Could you do it, please?
Mirror and window, students need diversity and population. This is very fast. Life experience, engage. Students, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm working at the same time.
You might have to scroll around because it all comes at once, Xiomara.
Yes, my email is at.
I'm sorry, Nicole.
I'll take over, sorry. Students need to see themselves reflected in the literature that they read. That's so true. Have student create characters. Somebody really liked that in the video. Students need to see themselves in all aspects of the classroom. I am smart. I love the positive affirmations someone wrote. Diversity population and how everyone can learn about other. Some other comments, kids need to see themselves in books, especially in the world we live in today. It helps to build alliances across differences. Yeah, I thought that was also a very powerful statement.
Yes, me too. Those alliances, I even like the term that she chose to call it alliances, because isn't that what we're in need of right now at this moment in time? And so as we work with kids, we can, and by including this type of curriculum, we can really help kids begin to understand one another at a deep level, at a values level, at a norms level, at a significant way, not something superficial like what food I eat on holidays. Okay, which now, of course, that's important too, but not as important as really understanding my worldview and so forth. So thank you. So let's continue. And remember that my mirror could be your window. So we really want to foster this sense of connection and belonging for every single person. That little girl who said, I didn't have any friends. Like, I think that always wounds us as teachers when we hear kids say that. And we can't let that happen. All the kids have to belong and feel like they belong. And we want to affirm who kids are, their languages, their beliefs, their identities, their personal histories. We also want to provide authentic opportunities for kids to learn about each other. So this is one of the things about the books that we select. They have to be authentic and they have to be current and they have to be truthful, right? Otherwise, we're not sharing the right thing. And we want to definitely help kids understand the world that they live in, because we're already so interconnected. It's not just about life in New York City or life in the US. It's also all those intercultural connections that exist around the globe. And I do want to mention that one of the reasons that picture books still should hold a place in our curriculum right through middle school and even into adulthood, they really could, is because the illustrations also provide information, and the use of art can also deepen our appreciation of the cultural groups that the book and its illustrations represent. I wanted to say something before I forget it, two things actually. One is, of course, there could be white characters, and you might say, well, I'm a Russian speaker, and so so that's good if there's white characters, but are they Russian? Are they Russian American? So there could be situations where kids identify as white racially, and yet they still feel excluded from the curriculum that we're using. So let's remember that. And the other thing I didn't want to forget to tell you, because it's important, is we will take a break around 10:30 so that all of you can have like 10 minutes to get more coffee or just take a stretch. So now I want you to hear from Francie Latour, who is a Haitian American author, and she is going to share her perspective on this. And we will hear as she's speaking about a group called Indigo Arts Alliance. You may want to go to their website after today. And there's also a children's book festival called Beautiful Blackbird, and you'll hear about that as she speaks as well.
Brought to you by Indigo Arts Alliance. An interview with Francie Latour, author of Auntie Luce's Talking Paintings, a book featured in the Beautiful Blackbird Children's Book Festival.
Welcome to Beautiful Blackbird Children's Book Festival. My name is Francie Latour, and I am the author of the picture book Auntie Luce's Talking Paintings. So for me, the term African diaspora relates to my heritage because I am Haitian American. My parents were born and raised in Haiti. Roots and identity are both really strong elements of my book. Auntie Luce's Talking Paintings is about a Haitian American girl who travels to Haiti to see her aunt. And so she has this sense of what I would call hyphenated identity, kind of in between. She doesn't feel quite Haitian, she doesn't feel quite American, and she's trying to figure that out. And that's something that's really important to her in terms of her identity and knowing who she is. And then when she goes to Haiti, she really connects with the Haitian part of herself, which I think is where roots come in. Part of the book is also about being connected to our ancestors, knowing our history, and telling our own stories, not allowing others to tell our stories for us. The roots of Haitian identity that she experiences while she's there are a very important part of her journey and her visit with her aunt. When I was growing up, I never saw any books that reflected my identity or my roots. I had a really strong sense of my Haitian identity and Haitian culture growing up in the United States from home and from my parents. But when I went to school and, people didn't know about the Haitian Revolution or know anything about Haiti, I was really surprised because it has such an amazing history and such a beautiful culture. It was really important to me to create a book that showed both of those things. Thank you to Indigo Arts Alliance and all of the festival partners.
Indigo Arts Alliance's Beautiful Blackbird Children's Book Festival is a book festival to diversify the American experience and build a resilient new generation. Through colorful storybooks, written and illustrated by Black people, all children are invited to explore Black narratives and characters. Beautiful Blackbird Children's Book Festival is particularly focused on reaching a Black and brown audience so that these children can see themselves reflected in beautiful stories and pictures.
Okay, so that's certainly something that we all want to be aware of. And now I want to make you think for a minute. We're not going to type in the chat. We're just going to think, each one of us. What would you say in your mind, just talking, self-talk, you're talking to yourself. What would you say makes a text culturally responsive or culturally sustaining? What would be the qualities of that text or the elements of that text that make it culturally responsive? What would you say if you had to list some things? Let me give you a minute to think. Okay, so here are some of the things that other people that have thought about this topic say. They say, well, it should contain characters, events, and settings that resonate with the experiences of our learners and their families. This is one of the reasons that Jane Fleming, being in Chicago in an urban center, she felt like there weren't enough books that kids were reading about urban life and urban experience, and then of the particular groups that make up the different communities of Chicago, which is a huge city like New York City, not quite as large, but still those pockets of different groups in different areas of the city. And it should have a strong appeal to our learners. When they open it, they should say, oh, that happened to me. Oh, I did that. Oh, my aunt is like that. And it should trigger a lot of conversation. It should trigger a desire to talk and to participate. It certainly should reflect diverse perspectives, because even 5 people from Haiti might feel differently about a particular event or about a particular experience. So we want diverse perspectives, not just a singular idea of what it means to be Haitian, as an example. And we want to make sure that the illustrations are positive, that the characters that are depicted in the illustrations, that there's no stereotypes, no caricatures, and also that it's of high quality in terms of its presentation, the binding, the paper quality, the cover. So we want to make sure that we're really using really high quality books. The dialogue should feel familiar and authentic. It should use rich vocabulary and complex sentence patterns. It should include thought-provoking or memorable phrases, things that kids will say, oh, that's so beautiful. I love the way the author said that. And it should be contemporary. Now, I will be showing you historical fiction, but there should be some connection that kids of today can make to the book. So we don't want to show something that's so distant that kids can't even relate to it. And often it is written by a culturally diverse author and illustrated by a culturally diverse illustrator. And I really tried my best to make sure that that was true, because I agree with Francie Latour. The book should be written by an insider, people that really understand at a deep level the culture that they're trying to represent and the experience that they're trying to represent. But the most important thing is kids should love it. It should have a strong story. It should be engaging. They should be interested in the book. They should want to read it again. They should want to take it home, and so forth. And I'm showing you this slide, not because I don't think you haven't seen this before. I know you have this concept of culture having a surface level, like the music I listen to, the games I play, the dress I wear, the food I eat. the celebrations I go to, that's all surface culture, and it is important, but not half as important as deep culture. The values I hold, the norms I follow in the behavior that I'm expected to perform on a daily basis, my perspective on the world, that's much more important. So we don't just want our books to show the superficial aspects of culture. We really want it to be able to reflect the deep culture at a values level, at a perspectives level. And certainly, these are some of the books that we'll be seeing today. And certainly we want these books to promote interest and engagement. We've already said that. They should get interested in books. They should say, do you have any other books like that? And one of the things that I'll tell you about more directly later is that Jane Fleming created a website called Kids Like Us, because when she was teaching, she was a reading specialist, and when she was teaching, kids would come up to her and say, "Miss, don't you have any books about kids like us?" Because they were very aware that they weren't reading anything that felt familiar. So if we want to get kids interested in books, they have to be reading outside of school. We can't do enough in school to get them reading. We have to be developing readers, kids who love reading. And so we have to promote an interest in books. And we have to introduce them to authors where they say, hey, did Eric Velasquez write any other books? Because we want them to read all the books possible from an author that they connect to. We want them to be motivated. We want their frequency of reading to go up. Even if they're reading the same book over and over because they like it so much, they're reading and they're reading again and again. And that's what we want. And we do want these books to connect with the family. And I believe all the books I'm showing you today would connect with kids and also with their families. And it should give them a positive self-concept and a concept of themselves as a reader and possibly an illustrator. Hey, I could be an illustrator. Hey, I could be a writer, just like the author of this book. I want them to think that. And definitely it should activate their prior knowledge, and that it goes a long way to supporting their comprehension. So these two books are examples of realistic fiction. It's fiction, but it feels real, feels realistic. These are more books that we'll see today, and I'm listing the language communities that they come from. And all of these books would affirm the importance of extended family relationships in children's lives, invite kids to tell their own stories about moving to a new country if they've immigrated, or just moving to a new locale. Maybe it reflects, well, hopefully it reflects the family's daily life and experiences, at least a few. And it definitely should represent bicultural, bilingual, and possibly binational experiences. The time when I was in Russia and the time that I'm now in the US, or the time that my family was in Russia and the time that now that my family is in the US. So we want to use culturally responsive picture books in particular. I know we're also reading chapter books and novels and poetry and essays, and speeches, but we also want picture books in the mix because it motivates reluctant readers. They relate to the book because it's shorter, A. B, it has a lot of interesting illustrations. And it works really well for read aloud and follow-up discussion. It invites rereading and multiple reads. The illustrations amplify the text, draw students in. It appeals to all levels. I can use a picture book with entering and emerging as much as I can use it with expanding and commanding. And it appeals to all learning styles, visual and verbal, and it takes less time. I can sneak it in. I can do it in a short period before I go on to the next unit, or while I'm in the middle of a unit, just as a break. And it can be used as a standalone text or in combination with another more difficult text. And I can use it to build background before I read a chapter book or a novel. And this is the type of thing we can do with culturally responsive picture books. I can use it as a mentor text. I'll be showing you that today for language development. I can use it to conduct literary analysis. I can teach things like character traits, setting, point of view, foreshadowing, imagery, and I can teach writer's craft too. I can teach multiple meanings of words. I can show how the word that the author chose affects tone and meaning. I can do think alouds and I can show them, oh, I don't really know this word. What could I do to figure out the meaning of this word? So I can model think alouds of how to employ reading strategies when I bump into something that I'm not understanding. I can promote close reading by taking just a single line or one page, and we can practice close reading and making inferences. And I can use the picture book, both the text and the illustrations, to inspire writing. I can teach visual literacy skills, how to scan the page, how to look at an illustration and get the most from it. And I can compare literary works by different authors on the same topics, which I'm going to model for you very shortly. And I also want to highlight universal themes as I teach these books, because I want not just, if I'm reading a book that represents a celebration or a tradition in Pakistan, I also want the rest of the kids to relate to it. So I want to choose books that not only reflect a particular experience, but also that all of my kids can probably relate to as well. So today we're going to explore just fiction, realistic fiction and historical fiction, including memoir. But next time on May 8th, we'll do informational text, which includes biography, because a biography is information about an individual. And I'll also talk briefly about artifactual literacy, because you'll see why. So let's take a minute to talk about how to select our books, because selection is everything. How we decide what books are in and what books are out, and why I'm not going to use this book, but I am going to use this other book. We should have really strong criteria for doing this. And a checklist is always useful to apply criteria. So a colleague of mine from Rhode Island College, Rachel Toncelli, who is trilingual, but she speaks Italian and English most proficiently. She and I took a lot of checklists that exist, including some by Jane Fleming, but we had to add to it because a lot of the other checklists do not look at language. They don't look enough at language. So we felt we had to go a little bit further and add some other categories. And we presented this checklist at a conference in 2019. And this checklist has areas for consideration and also questions we should ask under each. And it's posted on the Padlet, and I'm hoping you downloaded it, because we're going to look at it now. And so remember that it's 2 pages, so don't just look at the front. If you printed it front and back, make sure you look at both pages. And what I would like you to do is to look over all the considerations. There are a lot of considerations on the 2 sides. And I would like you to point out 3 of the questions that are listed here that you think are extremely important for ELA, ENL, and bilingual teachers to consider when they evaluate their book collections. And I want you not just to point out the questions, 3 of them, but also say why. And we're not going to read this aloud to each other. You can just watch as people post things. And so you're going to voice your opinion, and you're going to also read the opinions of your colleagues. And I'm going to give you about 3 or 4 minutes to do this. And while you're working, I'm going to play a little music. So the task is to look over the checklist, to point out 3 questions you think are extremely important, to put them into the chat and say why you think they're important. And this is for your colleagues to read. And I'll get to read it later. I always look at the chat after, but we're not going to read these out loud, okay? But I still want you to participate. Please do. Okay, so you may not have been able to list everything you wanted into the chat, but I hope right now you'll look at what each other put in there into the chat as things that they thought were really critical to make sure are true about the books that you're choosing and selecting. And remember that you do have hopefully a book room or a school library in addition to your own collection of books. And we can also share among teachers. But what I'm sharing with you here is I wanted to model it for you on the last slide, that during distance learning or in-person learning, when kids are working, I can play music, instrumental music, so that they're not getting caught up in the words of the song. I don't want to have words in, or, I don't want the music to have words in it. I want it to just be instruments. But this can mirror the cultures that are represented in the book that we're reading. And so it's giving kids another layer of experience while they're thinking and while they're working. So be thinking about this. And sometimes I choose folk music so that, maybe some of the older kids might go, oh, my parents listen to that, or something like that. Maybe they're not so drawn into it, but I want to make sure that it is authentic and also that it represents different aspects of a particular cultural group, which certainly means I do from time to time want to use the folk music that comes out of the culture. Okay, so some other questions we can ask is, does it capture authentic experiences? Does it avoid stereotypical topics? When I was looking for books that represented the experience of Chinese speaking kids and families, I was disappointed to find so many books that were all about Chinese New Year and not enough about other aspects. So we don't just want to read books about the Chinese experience in the United States when it's New Year or when it's Cinco de Mayo. And so we definitely want to make sure also that the home language that's used in the text is accurate. And here's a case where you might want to rely on your Arborn consultants to just be sure is the Creole that's used in this book accurate. And if you decide, well, I still want to use the book, you should at least acknowledge with kids that the language that's being used is not as authentic as it needs to be, and what the substitute would be. I did want to mention that, of course, we do have chapter books and novels that represent the cultures of our kids. But remember that the only illustration typical in a chapter book or in a novel is on the cover, or sometimes there's some back matter, and otherwise it's just solid text. So picture books offer us something that chapter books and novels don't. Like from time to time, there might be some line drawings or a little illustration in one part of the text, but it's more typical that it's all text once you get inside. And so this is the reason that we're trying to complement these wonderful books that you see on the screen with picture books. So a couple more points that we want to make before we start looking at the books is we do want to remember what's involved in reading. And I posted this also on the Padlet. And it was to remind us that, yes, kids need decoding skills. They need to know the phonics, how to pronounce the word in front of them. And they also need to recognize sight words, because a word like the, THE, is not decodable. It's not phonetically decodable. Or a word like enough is not phonetically decodable. So phonics is not enough. They need sight word knowledge. But in addition to the background knowledge, they also need to recognize the structures, the sentence structures that they're bumping into and the vocabulary that they're bumping into, because they're not going to have any comprehension if it's a very long and complex sentence and they don't get it. They don't understand it because of the complexity, or they're bumping into a lot of words that they just don't know. They're not going to comprehend it, even though they are reading every single word in front of them. So we want to remember that. And so now I'd like to do another waterfall chat. And I would like you to think how oral language affects read and writing. In other words, how does speaking ability, listening and speaking ability impact reading comprehension or writing ability, and please type what you're thinking into the chat box, but don't hit enter until I tell you to. And so while you're thinking, I'll play a little bit more music. Okay, so go ahead and hit enter. And before we start reading some of the comments that are in there, I would like you to be thinking about, why am I modeling waterfall chat? Well, it's because if you just do chat with kids when you're working remotely, some will answer and the others will sit back and just go, oh, I know Roberto's going to answer, so I'm not going to put anything in there. I don't feel like typing. But when you do a waterfall chat, everybody has to answer, or you're hoping that everybody answers. And later you can look at the chat and you can see if any kids were missing in action, the MIAs. And then you can speak to them privately and just say, hey, I was looking for your comment in the chat and I didn't see it. Oh, I hope you'll answer next time that we do a waterfall chat. So we don't want to scold them. We want to encourage them, right, to put something in. So let's go ahead and read like 3 or 4 or 5 things that are in the chat. Like how does speaking and listening affect reading comprehension and writing?
One comment is, language allow a better comprehension in reading and writing.
Yes, definitely. So if I know a word, if I speak the word or I listen to it and I know what it means, if I read the same word, I'm in. I already know what it means.
Speaking what you are going to write out loud before you try to write helps you write it. And reading out loud what you have written makes it much easier to find mistakes. In this way, you can use all language to help students' written language development.
Yes, so doing speaking ahead of writing is so helpful because it's almost like a dress rehearsal for what you're going to write. And so giving kids a chance to talk back and forth among them with a partner or with you and kind of say what they're thinking they're going to write about, it's kind of like a warm up. And so that's very helpful to writing. And also you can give kind of some soft correction as they're speaking and say, oh, you said this word, but you might really want to use this word when you're writing, and you can offer them things. Something else, Nicole?
Yeah, someone says it reflects level of understanding, could be in their native language.
Yeah, so they might want to do their listening and speaking in their native language to tell you what they're understanding about the book. And I'm glad you brought that up, because you as the teacher will get a fuller picture of their comprehension when you let kids comment using translanguaging, using their native language and or English. You'll see better everything they comprehended, because maybe they caught something, but they don't know how to say it in English yet. Okay, and I'm sorry, we're going to have to leave it there just because of how many things we're trying to do today, but thank you for entering your comments. And this is kind of a picture of what we were just thinking about. We know that having all these reading abilities matters, having reading skills and having reading strategies and concepts of print and understanding the genres and how letters work. Of course, all of that leads to reading comprehension, but so does vocabulary and oral language. And so this comes from OISE, the OISE Institute in Toronto. This is where Jim Cummins was based before he was retired. He's now retired. And so both sides of this triangle, they're equally important. And we don't want to forget that kids knowing the sounds of English, the vocabulary of English, the structures of English, building knowledge that they need before they need to read, all of this adds to their comprehension of a text. So now we're going to take a look at a lesson planning template that I created for our use, and certainly you're welcome to modify it. But I was trying to create a template that would allow me as a teacher to think about all the language, literacy, or cross-cultural learning objective I could have for culturally responsive books. And so I would like you to find this 2-page template. You'll see it better in a minute, but at the top, it says name of the book, grade, and age level. And then inside of it, it includes all of these categories. What background knowledge should I build? What vocabulary and sentence pattern development should I engage in? What decoding skill practice can I do while kids are in this book? Can I see decoding practice, sight words, and phonics that kids could practice in my book? What about reading skills and reading strategies? What about fluency practice? What writing could they do after the book? What cross-cultural learning targets could I have? And what translanguaging possibilities does the book offer? And this is another picture of the same thing. These are all the things I might do with a culturally responsive or culturally sustaining text. And when we get started, because I also want to show you how to think about proficiency level and literacy level, as we get started, we'll concentrate on almost all of these. I'm going to leave, with our first books, I'm going to leave out some of the reading skills and strategies because I know you get a lot of practice with that and it's already embedded in your curriculum. I will concentrate on a single book on every single thing that's in the template, but we don't have time today to use the template and unpack every single book that I'm going to show you because we will be looking at 13 books, a baker's dozen. Okay, so when you plan, you should fill this out completely. If I'm going to do a particular book, then let's say I'm going to do Calling the Water Drum Home. I want to find everything I possibly could do in the book. When I analyze the book, I want to fully analyze it once, and then I just keep that as a reference for the future. But when I teach the book, I'm not going to do everything that I listed. I'm going to choose the pieces that I'm going to work on because I don't want to beat a good book to death. I want to look at the kids in front of me and then look at what I could do and then say, well, what do these kids need the most? And then I'll pick and choose from my template what I'll do. But I probably should build background and build vocabulary and build some sentence at a sentence level every time I do a book. It's just, I won't necessarily every time I teach a book do a lot of reading skills or a lot of reading strategies, or maybe I won't even work on fluency. So we're going to practice finding objectives as we go along today in our culturally responsive text. And these are the things that we're going to work on as we go along. This is the form that I'm asking you to pull out and take a look at. And when it comes to this section on working on vocabulary and sentence patterns, I want to be thinking about this by proficiency level. You should not teach the same vocabulary to everyone sitting in front of you because they're at different proficiency levels. I should be teaching basic words to entering and emerging kids. I should be teaching middle level words to transitioning kids. I should move there. They know man, woman, boy, girl. I shouldn't pick out words that I think they know. I should choose words that I think they don't know and they're not using. And especially for commanding and expanding, I should be pushing their vocabulary forward, and likewise with the sentence patterns. So these are some of the things. I made a little chart of some of the things I could work on to show my second language learners how English works. I could teach them different types of words when I choose vocabulary. Am I choosing all the different types of vocabulary that they might learn? Or no, I'm always teaching nouns and I'm always teaching adjectives. Well, that's not good because then they're not expanding their verbs, or they're not working enough on prepositions, or they're not realizing all the determiners that they could use, this, that, these, those, etc. And what about word forms? Am I also, as I teach words, am I teaching the word forms, how words can end, and how I can turn a verb like enjoy into a noun, enjoyment? Am I showing them that? As much as I'm showing them enjoy and enjoyed, past tense. Okay, I want to show everything I can show about how English works. I can show all these different sentence types. I can teach all of these verb tenses. And of course, I'm going to start with simple present, present continuous, simple past, and simple future with my beginners. But then as I go up the proficiency scale, I want to make sure that I'm pushing the tenses that I see them using in their own speaking and in their own writing. So I want to look at their expressive language, see what they're doing and not doing. And so if I were teaching, I would return to this chart and go, wait a minute, I'm doing too many nouns. I need to do more with adverbs. Okay, so, all right, I've done a lot with declarative sentences. Let me work more with exclamatory sentences or interrogative sentences and so forth. I've taught a lot of active voice. Now let me work on passive voice with kids. And don't forget that subject, verb, object order, which is the word order in English sentences, is not necessarily the word order in other languages inside of their sentences. So kids have automatic pilots inside of themselves, and it has to do with their native language. And if they're not a subject, verb, object, word order language, we have to really work on this word order in English. So I want to work on vocabulary. Yes, I do. I want to work on sentence length and complexity. I want to work on paragraph and essay construction. I want to help develop metalinguistic awareness, how English works differently than how Spanish works, let's say. And I definitely want them to understand discourse structure and genre. So I want to work on all of this. And certainly I want to work on reading skills, reading strategies, and reading fluency. And after I've done all of that skill building, the language and the literacy skill building, then I do want to extend to some writing after we've done some reading. And I definitely want to help them understand other cultural groups. That cross-cultural learning is really important. And I want to take advantage of any translanguaging possibilities that my books offer. So one of the other things I wanted to do before we get into the books is make sure that we're using the term skill and strategy correctly, because there is a lack of consistency and sometimes a little bit of confusion in how we're using these terms. And so remember that a skill is an acquired ability. Maybe you needed a strategy at first. You didn't know how to decode the vowels in English, so you needed a strategy to help you do that, to get to the long and the short I sounds. But once you've acquired those sounds and you know how the words work, it should be automatic. And then it moves to being a skill. So if it is without awareness and just automatic, that's a skill. But if there's conscious awareness and you're actually applying a strategy that you know because you're trying to compensate when you're not understanding something, then this deliberate and goal-directed attempt that you're making to unpack something that you're not quite understanding, that's where strategies come into play. And so obviously for accomplished reading, we need both skills and strategies, but we do want things that maybe start out as a strategy to become automatic so that kids are reading more fluently in the future. And so I want you to hear from Lee Hall, who's going to talk of this same concept of skill and strategy. Her full video is 8 minutes in length, but I took some clips for us to listen to.
Today we're talking about two very common terms in literacy instruction, reading comprehension skills and reading comprehension strategies. These are two terms that get used a lot, but did you know they have different meanings and get used for different purposes? So a lot of people don't know this. It's really important to clarify so that we can think about how you're crafting your instruction to support the development of each. What I want to do here is first give you a definition of a reading skill, and then give you a definition of comprehension strategy, and then give you an example of each, because there can be some interplay between the two. It's not 100% cut and dry, and a skill can morph into a strategy, right? So let's start with the definitions first. What do we mean when we say we're teaching reading skills? What is a skill? So a skill is an automated and automatic action. It's a process that you do without even thinking about it. We're not aware of what we're doing. We're just doing it. We have internalized it. We're very comfortable with doing it. We know it very well. And because of that, we don't have to devote a lot of cognitive, mental resources to thinking about what it is we're supposed to be doing. We just do it, right? Now, a strategy, on the other hand, is a deliberate action, okay? And we use strategies strategically. That's probably not the best way to put it, but we use them very deliberately and employ them really to help achieve a goal, or we use them when we have a problem, a hurdle that we need to get over, and we're thinking, how am I going to get past this issue? What's something I can do to get over this hump? All right, so a strategy is not automatic like a skill. With a strategy, we have to stop, recognize that something's going on here that's not quite working. We're having problems getting to our end goal, and then backing up and thinking, how can we solve this problem? What are some strategies? What are some things in our arsenal, in our toolbox that might help us get over this hump?
Okay, and so here's a little more of what she has to say.
Right. So if I'm reading a piece of text and I'm bumping along and everything's going pretty well, and all of a sudden I hit a sentence that's really long and it's dense, it's got some confusing words in it, I could employ a number of strategies here, right? One is I might go, whoa, what did I just read? I need to read that again. And having this metacognitive awareness that I need to back up and reread, all right, that is a comprehension strategy. So I can do that. And maybe I do that and go, that made sense. And now I'm moving on, okay? I'm back into the seamless fluidity of reading, all right? Maybe I reread and it sort of makes sense, but maybe there's some words in there I don't know. So I might say, well, let's sound it out. Let's ask somebody if they can tell me what this word means, how to pronounce it, maybe look it up in a dictionary. So I might draw on any of those strategies to try to make sense of what I'm reading, okay? But the thing is that I'm really being strategic about trying to understand something in the text that I don't understand, that I have questions about, that I am confused about. And it could involve a number of things like rereading, sounding out, asking questions, looking up information to fill in background knowledge, clarifying details, any number of things. The difference here is it's not fluid, okay? It's not seamless. Now, that said, there can be a point where a strategy shifts into a skill. Now, what does that mean? So if you think about sounding out words, okay, what happens is if I'm reading a text and all of a sudden I get to a big word and I don't know it, I don't have to think too hard at this point in my life about how to sound out a word. For the most part, I can do it. I can go, oh, I didn't get that word, back up, sound it out real quick, move on. I don't even think about it. I just do it, okay? So when you get to this point where something like, if you see a word that you don't know, sound it out, see if that helps. When it just becomes seamless, then it's transitioned into becoming a skill that you have, that you automatically use when you run into an issue with a word in a piece of text. So the main thing to take away from this is we want to teach students both reading skills and reading strategies. We want to build up their skills so that they have the ability to read in a very obviously in a fluent manner that's going to support their comprehension. But we also want to teach them strategies like rereading, asking questions, clarifying information, how to sound out words, etc., so that when they run into these comprehension problems, they have tools that they can draw on to help solve those problems or move them forward a.
Okay, and so one of the things that I tried to do for you was to post this onto the Padlet, where I took from a bunch of sources things that we that we think of mostly as skills. These are automatic, they happen automatically. So determining the main idea. I have strategies maybe for doing that, like rereading 3 times to see if I can find the main idea. But finding the main idea is actually a skill, as in skim or scan a text. It's a skill. Looking up a word in a dictionary, that's a skill. Okay, whereas what's under here are all strategies. And we'll keep this out because we're going to use this in just a little while after the break. So we'll be applying this, and I hope it will be useful to you to kind of have a list that differentiates among skills and strategies. And remember that skill and strategy can be applied to decoding. I don't know how to say this word, so I need a skill, or, well, if I don't know how to decode it, I don't have the skill. So then I have to apply a strategy. Maybe I have strategies for gaining more fluency. Maybe I have strategies for comprehension, and maybe I have strategies for critical reading. But eventually as I become skilled, I want it all to be automatic. And as we go up the grades, that's what we're working towards. So don't forget about fluency. Fluency involves accuracy, rate, and prosody, which is pitch, loudness, rate, phrasing, pause, duration. How long do I pause when I get to the end of a phrase? What about the rhythm and the tone and the expression? These are all things we can work on with kids, but obviously we're not going to work so much on fluency with entering and emerging kids. We'll start to work on fluency when we get to transitioning. And these are all the techniques we can use to work on fluency. And I just want to mention one, like when we have a read aloud, I'm going to show you a lot of read alouds that are on YouTube and Edpuzzle. The kids could be echo reading or choral reading or whisper reading while they're listening, or they could do repeated readings of the same text to see if they can get more fluently, or they can do paired reading with one another to practice reading a section before they read it to the class or to me on audio. And this phrase cued text means that I would draw slash marks in the text to show kids where to pause, where the natural pauses are in English. So if I find that a kid is reading and they don't know where to pause in English, like where do I take a breath and make a pause, I can mark the text to show them that. And reader's theater is another way to give kids fluency practice. So now I'm going to show you a very short video on Seesaw. Seesaw is good for entering, emerging, and transitioning kids, but could be used with any level kid. It's very, very simple to use to make an audio or a video recording. So if I am working remotely, but I want to see kids reading and I want to see their skills and I want to see their strategies and I want to see their fluency, I could have them make recordings for me. And one of the advantages of doing this on Seesaw is usually I found when I asked my kids to record themselves, in those days it was all audio, when I was teaching, they didn't just do it once because then they'd say, oh, I don't like that. And then they would re-record. And actually that's just what I wanted. I wanted them to read it and to many times. And they actually did that when they were submitting recordings. It wasn't once and done usually. They did it many times until they liked it and then they would submit it. So here we go.
Children will need to obviously log in by scanning the QR code that will have been sent to their class. Now, if I press the plus button and use the photo to take a picture of the pages from my book that I'm going to read, you will see now that will appear on my screen. So for the children to record themselves reading out loud, all they need to do is press the microphone button. They'll get a 3-second countdown and then they can have a go. What they can also do is use the mouse pointer option at the bottom that will highlight the words as they are reading it.
Okay, and so this is nice, this pointer, because then you can watch how they track print. Okay, so Seesaw is really good for asking kids to read aloud to you, to capture what they're reading, just a section, not the whole book, because then they'd have to take a lot of pictures of the text. And unless you already have a video that they could use and they make their own audio recording. And another really simple one is called Vocaroo. I'm just going to scroll along here until it gets to the part that I want you to see. So Vocaroo is as simple as you send them to the site, they click to record, it records. When they're done, they listen to themselves, they see if they like it. And if they do like it, there's all of these different ways that they can submit to you. They can copy the link and submit, they can download the file and submit. And this video that you can watch later shows you in Google Classroom how Vocaroo gets assigned, what it looks like on the teacher screen and what it looks like on the student screen. But I promise you it's very simple. Okay, so before we go to break, I just want to introduce the first theme that we're going to take a look at. And the reason that we're looking at this theme is to think about reading level and text difficulty in relation to student proficiency. And so we do have these charts. This comes from Lexile.com. I want you to notice this is what we expect by the end of the year. So at the end of fourth grade, kids reading at the 50th percentile that are proficient in English, we would like them to be reading at Lexile 850. So where would they be? At the start of the year, they would be one grade level behind, right? So at the start of fourth grade, proficient, notice I'm saying proficient English speakers, we would like them to be at Lexile 645 and grow to 850. But what I want you to notice on this chart, remembering that it's the end of the year expectation, is it doesn't grow a lot across these grade levels. Whereas if you look at kindergarten to first grade to second grade, wow, they expect a lot of growth there. So if you're working with entering and emerging and transitioning kids, I want you to remain calm, because once they catch up, it doesn't grow a lot. If you look here between fourth and eighth grade, even if they're at the 90th percentile in the Lexile they can read, it's only going up by about 100 or less Lexiles. And look here, it's going up 60 Lexiles. It's nothing. So we have a lot of time to get kids to the level they need to be at. But now remember, Lexile tells you zero, zilch, about the English language proficiency demands. And the only way you can know how demanding it is in vocabulary and sentence structure is your eyeballs. Lexile does not tell you that. So I do want to know Lexile, but I take it with a grain of salt. What I really want to look at with English learners is the text demands in terms of proficiency. So well, let me explain this first. On every book that I show you, I wanted to show you between grade 4 and grade 8, who do I see the book working for? And so this book, Kite Flying, which is really designed to be read to native speakers in the lower grades, and you can see it's guided reading level G, it's Lexile 280. The reason I'm showing you this book is because it is appropriate for entering and emerging students. And so if I were doing a theme on valued traditions on kites and kite festivals, and you notice this one is about Chinese American girls' experience flying kites. And this is about a Pakistani boy's experience with a kite festival that's celebrated in Pakistan, the Basant, hope I'm saying it right. And so both of these books are realistic fiction. I could have a theme like kites and kite flying and kite festivals, but I might need this book for my entering and emerging kids, and then I have to introduce it well. And certainly I would have no problem using this book with grade 4, maybe grade 5. But if I were working in the middle grades, but my kids were entering and emerging, I might start at the back of this book where it explains the history of kite flying in China. And actually, kite flying is believed to have begun in China. Well, I certainly would want my Chinese kids to know that, my Chinese speaking kids. And here, this is a higher guided reading level, a higher Lexile. It's designed for native speakers like in grade level 4. But this is perfect for transitioning and low expanding, which I will show you. And I believe this, I would have remember I'm an ex-middle school teacher, I would have no problem using this book with middle level kids and with upper elementary kids. So to me, this book would work for all of our grades. And so I want to show you a little bit about the lower book's language. And you can see here that it's representing a valued tradition, but the sentences are very simple. And the illustrations are gorgeous. And this is Grace Lynn, and she's written wonderful books for us. So I might even use this in an author study. Whereas the sentences in King for a Day, representing the Pakistani experience with a kite festival, this is much more demanding language. The bullies kite circles trying to trap falcon. I move away, comma, watching closely for the next attack. Quickly, I pull down as hard as I can, sending falcon into a steep dive. The vocabulary is not limited as it is here. The sentences are much more evolved than these sentences. And so I want to also see the language demand. And I would label on my chart, and you'll see that when we look at the chart again, I've provided a space for listing the proficiency level that can handle the book independently, okay? And so as we're planning, I'm going to show you with this theme on kites and kite flying, we're going to look at everything except reading skills and reading fluency. But then when we do the next book, we'll do everything. Okay, so this was just to get us started. We're going to do everything except reading skill and reading strategy. So as we work up to the break that we're going to take, if I were working on background knowledge, these are all things I could work on. I could help kids know, well, what's the difference between a festival and a fair, a festival and a carnival, a holiday and a festival? And so I want them to have precise understandings of each of these things and use the words correctly. I could show them about kite festivals around the world and in New York City. I could show them how families engage in kite making and how we make kites. And actually that is the Grace Lynn book is all about how to make a kite. We could talk about the materials that are used in kites. We could talk about the meaning of kites, what the colors mean, what the design means, what the streamers mean, because often kites have a lot of meaning, how we name kites and what that means. I could even get into the science of kites, how kites need an air current to ride on, the science of kite flying. Or I could do the origins and history of kites. And that's what the Grace Lynn book does at the back of the book. And I could start there with my middle level kids. These are the sentences in the Grace Lynn book. And you can see the sentence patterns. This is the entire book, which makes it good for entering and emerging, because it's not a lot of language, it's not a lot of sentences, but there are interesting words. And so, there's also native language words that get used. I could introduce all of these words these are all the materials that are used to make kites. And I could show them all the supplies, many of which are classroom items. I don't just need to talk glue and tape and paint and scissors and rulers for kite making. I also need it in my classroom. So I can use this. This is very high utility vocabulary. But I wanted you to notice that even in these few sentences, I'm teaching simple and expanded sentences. So I'm teaching them not just JJ paints a mouth, he paints a laughing mouth. I've now expanded the sentence to include modifiers. I have third person singular. JJ paints, Mama joins, that third person singular. I join, you join, she joins, right? I can get into declarative and interrogative sentences. Most are statements, but some are questions. And I even have one exclamatory sentence. There are subject pronouns, I and it. And then there are possessive pronouns. Let's see where that was. It's in there. Well, I'm not seeing it right now, but there are possessive pronouns, okay? And so there's articles, there's prepositions, there's some adjectives, there's commands. So I want to make sure that I'm seeing everything that I could do with that simple book when it comes to building language, okay? And the author is not offering you this. If the Lexile people or Scholastic looked at the book, I promise you they did not look at this. This is the ENL stuff. And I need to be able to find all of this. Oh, here it is. Are you ready to fly? Okay, so all of the things that I could teach. Now, just because I could teach all of this, am I going to teach all of this? No. But when I analyze the book, I'm going to analyze it for everything. And so that I know next year when I teach this book and I have different kids, what are all the things that I could teach at a word and sentence level? I can also have some decoding targets. Believe it or not, in this very simple book, I can teach long and short sounds of the vowels. Vowels are critical things for us to teach to second language learners because typically they operate very differently than the kids' native languages. And so here I could do long sound with fly and kite, and I could do short sound of I with it, is, stick, wind, and scissors. There's always a gazillion sight words, so I can do a ton of that. And then in terms of cross-cultural learning with this book, this text at the back of the book is not entering an emerging text. This is high developing and expanding text. It's teaching, this is really for the teacher to learn about how did kite flying begin in China, and it began over 2,000 years ago. And so here, there's a lot of information about kite flying in China, its origins and its current day practices. And then there is the inside covers are often quite interesting. And the inside covers of this book are very interesting. One is about the supplies that I need to make kites, and the other is about this culture, the cultural meanings of kites. And while I would have kids looking at the colors and shapes and the streamers and which have streamers and which don't have streamers, all of this, this kite means long life. This kite means joy. This kite means peace. This kite means industry. This kite means wisdom. That's important. I want to get to that values level. And while I would ask kids to read this, if I feel they can read it, or I could read it together with my kids that are entering and emerging. And here I would just choose sentences. I would not read every sentence. I would just read certain sentences. Many people believe that kite flying began in China. They believe it began over 2,000 years ago. Then I might skip ahead. Flying kites has become a cherished pastime. I'm not going to read every line with my entering and emerging kids, but I'm going to give all kids exposure to this little bit of history that's in the back. And so I could play music like this. I'm going to ask them to write about a kite that appeals to them, why they chose it, the original meaning of it, and what it means to them, why they like the colors, and so forth and so on. So even with a simple book, the front matter of this book is simple, and I could definitely do it with entering and emerging. I can go places with this with this book, and I certainly would want to. Okay, and let me just take one more minute to talk about some of the follow-up writing possibilities so that when you come back from break, we'll move on to the second book, which is higher level. We could retell the story of what the family did to make their kites. We could talk about how to make a kite, procedural writing, how to fly a kite, that's procedural writing. We could write a memoir, a time I flew a kite. We could compare and contrast different types of kites that we saw in the book. I might engage them in persuasive writing. I think kites are more fun to fly than drones. Do you agree or disagree? And persuade me why you think drones are more fun or why you think kites are more fun. And I definitely would point out the translanguaging possibilities, which in this book is restricted to just the names of family members. But why do I not call my mother? I speak Chinese. Why do I not call my mother mommy? It's because that's not her name. in Chinese. And so names are authentic. And I'm going to retain the native language name. When I refer to my brother, my sister, my mother, my father, my grandmother, I'm not going to change how I refer to them. It's going to be abuelita, or it's going to be tia. Okay, so I want to use that original name. Okay, so just right before we go to break, I do want to show you that every time I show you a book, I'm going to show you resources. Here, I'm sending you to her website and a read aloud of this book. And I also want you to know that on teachingbooks.net, there are many, many resources listed for this book. Original resources that teachingbooks.net created and other resources that they found. This scrolls down. And because this is a screenshot, I can't scroll, but there are many, many resources there. Okay, so let's take a 10-minute break. I'm going to expect you to come back at 10:44, and we'll move on to the second book, and then we'll continue with all of the other books that we want to take a look at today. So I'll see you at 10:44, and I will start right then on time. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with the second book, which is written at the transitioning and low expanding level. And again, you know, I will always list for you the Lexile. Remember that the grade level and Lexile that are listed, well, the grade level that's listed is thinking native speaking. And it's also thinking the grade level at which this story might fit into your curriculum and so forth. But you're the one with the eyes that can decide, would this book interest my kids? Can I make this book interesting to my kids? And so here you can see Basant is the most exciting day of the year with feasts and music and parties. People celebrate the arrival of spring, and many will make their way to the rooftops of Lahore to test their skills in kite flying battles. So this festival is all about knocking other people's kites out of the sky and becoming the king of the festival. And so here you see more language down here. I'm up early. My brother and sister arrived, still rubbing sleep from their eyes. My brother asks, Malik, is that all you made? Malik means king in Arabic. My sister says, how can you be king of Basant with only one kite? It's called falcon. Insha'Allah, which means God willing, it will be fast enough. I send my brother many blocks downwind so he can catch the kites I will set free. Okay, and I learned from looking up information about Urdu, which is spoken in Pakistan and northern India. I learned that we have many words in Urdu that come from Arabic, Persian, and Sanskrit. And so you will see some Arabic root words, some words that emanate from Arabic, those of you that speak Arabic, also in this book. But look at all the things I found in just this one page. I found simple sentences, expanded sentences, compound sentences, complex sentences, declarative sentences, interrogative sentences, contractions, prepositions, conjunctions, present tense, future tense, modal verbs, passive structures, compound words, and embedded dialogue. So why am I pointing this all out? Again, I'm not going to teach all of this. These are possibilities. I want to capture the first time I analyze this book, I want to see what's in it from a language teaching perspective and from a literacy teaching perspective. and from a cross-cultural perspective and a cross-lingual or translanguaging perspective. And so I want to capture this once, get it on my form, and keep the form with the book for myself so that the next time I teach it, I know everything that's possible. So if I see, oh, my kids really need help with passive structures, good. I know it's in this book and I can pull it out and show them that while I'm teaching it. Or if I know, hey, they're not doing any compound sentences, I can say, great, I can do that when I'm in this book. So another thing I wanted to show you, and this comes from some research by Rowe, is that it's really good to create lexicons that are based on grammatical function. What does that mean? That means, why don't I do verb, like all verbs or all nouns or all adverbs, because it will help kids see how those words work. And look at all the verbs that were in this book. I wrote them all down, and I certainly am not going to teach them all. But what this allows me to do is say, oh, I'm going to teach hit and throw and catch and yell to my beginners. But I'm going to teach slash and taste freedom and tangle and let out the string and make their way. I'm going to teach that to my upper proficiency kids. So by looking at it once and saying, what a great book this would be for teaching really vivid verbs and helping kids, whatever verbs they know now, trying to expand their verb repertoire. Now I can see a lot of great verbs that are in this book. Again, you're not going to teach more than 4, 5, 6 of these to each proficiency level, but you are aware now of all the things that you might teach. And just as with the earlier book by Grace Lynn, with this one, I can also teach long and short vowel sounds if I want to, if I feel the kids need help with that. Never mind, this is like a lower grade skill, but if they're new to English, hey, this is important to teach. It doesn't correspond to a certain grade level when you're dealing with English language learners. They have to learn it when they're new to English. So all of these are the long sounds. All of those are the short sounds. But I'm going to show you in a minute. I also created grade level phonics lists for you. And if I wanted to work on 5th grade targets, I could teach vowel digraphs. I could teach the EA and EE vowel digraph, all the long E sounds that I get with the variants of spelled EA or EE. And all of these were in the book as well. Okay, so if I wanted to just teach my transitioning and expanding kids the same vowel digraphs that I want to do to native speakers, I could do that. But I might also offer them a chance to work on something specific like this that they have to sort out with English. I could do compound words. It's another option. Okay, so these are all things that I could work on at a word level. And then the final page, just like Grace Lynn's book, tells me about this festival. And her book told about the origins of kite flying in China and current practices with kites, how families enjoy them. This one talks about the festival, which, by the way, was stopped, I think, in 2006 because it was getting too dangerous. People were coating the string on their kites with glass and with metal, with sharp metal pieces. And so it was getting dangerous, but it's back now. I believe it's back for good, but probably with more restrictions. So it returned in 2013, and that's the history that's told here. So this does get information about this festival so kids can understand it. And versus inside the text itself is narrative, but this is informational in the back. So often this is true with our picture books, that there's kind of 2 pieces to the book, one where we're gaining information and the other where it's telling a story. So some follow-up writing that I could do with this book, and I'll just play a little segment for you of some music, some folk music from Pakistan. While kids are thinking or while they're of writing that could be in the background. And they could do all of these different types of writing. Obviously, we can always have them retell the story. They could explain the Festival of Asan. They could explain all the ways that Malik got the other kites out of the sky. They could write their own memoir of a treasured festival from their background. They could do procedural writing. This story involves a bully that gets outwitted. They could describe a procedure for how to outwit a bully, or how kites are flown, descriptive information about how, describing kites that are flown in the story. And I wanted you to know one other thing about this book, which is that Malik, the main character, is in a wheelchair, but he's definitely not, he does not show any disability. He becomes king of the festival because of his tremendous ability to fly kites. So this book also allows you to talk about what is ability and what is disability for those of you working in with kids with IEPs, or you're working in a special education situation. So there's a YouTube read aloud for this. The author of the book presents the book, and she does make mention of how to use the book to discuss ability and disability. And then this is a Lee and Low book, and all the Lee and Low books come with teacher guides. Okay, so, but every book I show you today, this is what I want to say early. Any book I show you today could be part of an author study, unless the author only wrote a single book. And it also could be part of a memoir unit, that I read you one book of a memoir that the author, a memory that the author had, and then we think of memories that we've had, and we write our own memoirs. I could focus on diverse families. All of the books that I'm showing you today, you can scan them to decide, is it a two-parent family? Is it a single-parent family? Are kids being raised by or cared for by other relatives? Did any of the kids in the story lose both parents? Is it a biracial family? Is it a dual country family where the kid lives part of the year in the Dominican Republic with grandmom, and the other part of the year they live in New York City? So we can look for all of those things. We can focus on the relationships that children have with various adults, be they parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, neighbors, teachers. And we can also look at relationships among siblings and friends. So the book that I just finished showing you, that book talks about sibling and friend relationships. There's not a lot of information there in King for a Day describing relationships between Malik and adults. We can focus obviously on cultural traditions and experiences, and some books allow us to focus on prejudice and gender bias and social issues and personal experiences such as the loss of a parent or illness in a family. And the books also can help us focus on prized music, art, and belongings. So I want you to be thinking, this is a lot in one slide, but I want you to be thinking about all of this, because these books, every single book that I'm going to show you, I don't have time to talk about all of its possibilities, but I promise you that every book that I showed you you could review this list and think of all the little connections you could be making with the book to all of the things listed on this page. And I also wanted you to see something from the British Council. Some of your kids, if they learned English in their home country before coming to the US, might have learned British English. But this is a wonderful resource from the British Council talking about how to use multilingual approaches with multilingual kids. And their Project 12 is all about festivals, teaching about festivals. And so they list some essential questions we could ask. And they also explain why this theme of festivals is so strong for multilingual learners. Okay, and certainly those two books that I just showed you lend themselves to the idea of festivals in New York City and around the world. So now I'm going to take the time to make you look at a single book. And because so many of our learners are Spanish speakers from the Caribbean, we're going to look at a book that represents the Puerto Rican and Dominican cultures. And we're going to analyze the entire book, and you're going to help me with a certain part. And this is also realistic fiction. But in order for you to be able to help me, we're going to have to listen to a part of the book. Okay, so this is the book, and I believe I could use this book with all ages because it starts with him as an upper elementary age child and it ends with him as an adult, a young adult and an adult. And this is for transitioning and up. And the book does exist in Spanish if I wanted to have my beginners read it in Spanish so they know the story, and then we would read it in the class in English. So while you're listening to the story, I would like you to pull out this sheet that shows the skills and the strategies, because I would like you to think about the skills or strategies that could be taught with this book. And I'm going to have to shorten how much of the video we get to listen to and tell you the rest of it, but I do want you to hear a bit of the book read to you.
Hi guys, Miss Mercedes here. Today I'm going to be reading you one of my favorite things, a book about one of my other favorite things, music. It's called Grandma's Record, and it's by Eric Velasquez. Every year, right after the last day of school, I'd pack a suitcase with my cool summer clothes, my favorite toys, and a sketchbook. Then my dog Daisy and I were off to Grandma's apartment in El Barrio. Because my parents worked, Grandma's apartment was my summer home. From the time my parents dropped me off until the day they picked me up, Grandma wrapped me in her world of music. Sometimes when she played a record, we would dance together. Other times, she would dance alone and tell me her stories about growing up in Puerto Rico. When Grandma played a merengue from the Dominican Republic, her hips would sway from side to side. As her favorite salsa record played, she'd say, "Just listen to that conga," while she played an imaginary drum. Grandma likes all types of music, but one record was very special to her. Whenever she played it, she would put her hand over her heart and close her eyes as she sang along. When it was over, Grandma would sometimes sit quietly, thinking about Grandpa and the old days in Santurce, her hometown. Sometimes, Grandma said, a song can say everything that is in your heart as if it was written just for you. My favorite days were the one when Grandma would tell me, "You pick the record today." No matter what I would choose, Grandma would always say, "Siempre me gusta tu selección." I always like your selection. Sometimes I would sneak in Grandma's special song just to watch her put her hand over her heart and sing. Then she'd always ask, "¿Cómo tú sabes?" How did you know? If it was too hot to go outside, I'd spend hours looking through all of Grandma's album covers. I'd pick out my favorites and make sketches of the art. As I drew, I could see the record covers coming to life and the bands performing right there in Grandma's living room. Grandma never went to any nightclubs to see her favorite bands perform. She was happy just to stay at home with me and listen to her scratchy records. But Santurce was home to hundreds of musicians, and she knew a lot of the people who played on the records. Here he is drawing album covers. Oops. Grandma's nephew Sammy played percussion in Rafael Cortijo's band, the best band in Puerto Rico. One day when the band was in town, Sammy brought over Cortijo, the band's lead singer, Ismael Rivera, for a surprise visit. Home-cooked meals were hard to come by on the road, and they couldn't pass up the chance to taste Grandma's famous arroz con gandules, rice and pigeon peas. While eating dessert, Sammy had another surprise for Grandma. 2 tickets to the band's first New York concert, and their brand new record, which wasn't even in the stores yet. I raced over to the record player, thrilled to be the first New Yorker to hear their latest music.
Okay, so I'm going to have to stop it here just because of time, but you can see that they get dressed up, and let me jump along. They go to the concert, and the band plays a very special record just for Grandma. And it is her favorite song, but it's everybody else sitting there. It's their favorite song too. And then at the very end of the book, we see how as he grows, he continues to share this love with his grandmother of music, and he brings records to play with for her of his favorite music. And then at the very end, it talks about how he always remembers, you know, how this love was created in him about music from his time with his grandmother. It's a beautiful little book. Some of you already know it. But what I want to show you now is every part of our template. Okay, so of course I would put the name of the book up here, Grandma's Records, and I would say the age that I'm going to use it for. I would say the proficiency level that can read this book by themselves, and the literacy level, the lexile level demanded by the book. All of that I've already shared with you. And then here, for background knowledge, it could be things like staying with a relative for the summer while parents work, apartment living, summer activities, the different types of music, the comfort foods like arroz con gandules, going to concerts, going to the Bronx for a concert, transportation to get there, notable musicians. Of course, it's of the grandmother's era. And then there's tons of things that I could do in terms of decoding. I could work on all these short A sound. I could work on the 2 sounds, the vowel digraph of school and cool and room and 2, but also the secondary sound of book and look. I could do the TH sound, I could do the AY sound, and there's tons and tons of sight words, but for upper grades, I might choose something like the GH, GHT. And then I could do compound words. There's some of them in the book. If I wanted to focus on verbs and adjectives, I could break out words from the story this way, teaching simple verbs and simple adjectives to my entering and emerging. And if I were working with expanding and commanding, I would try to find more elevated or less frequent types of words. And I also could teach adverbs to my expanding and commanding and even transitioning. And then I want you to know that every sentence pattern is in the book. So whatever level they're at, I could work on simple or compound on complex sentences. And I, as a teacher, could list a few for myself so I remember where they are in the book, but I don't have to. I could just make note of, oh, there's passive, there's simple, there's compound, there's complex. And then I did create this list for you. I was able to find a phonics scope and sequence from Pearson, and I could find the phonics that is taught at each grade level for 4, 5, and 6. Now remember, this is for native speakers. This is what we concentrate on in grades 4, 5, and 6 for native speakers. And then for grade 7 and 8, I use the New York State standards, the next generation standards, to pull out spelling and language and word study targets for grade 7 and 8. So if I wanted to work on grade level kinds of things, I could do so, but I might need to work on lower grade level things if my kids are at lower proficiency levels. But if you would pull that sheet out, this phonics sheet, I would like you on these 2 pages, which I copied for you, to see, can you find any multiple meaning words? Can you find any words that end with the ED or ING ending? And can you find any compound words just on these 2 pages? Okay, and I'll be able to show you what's there in a minute and you can check yourself. But let's listen to a little music while you look at these 2 pages. Okay, for those of you that don't know that song, that is Grandma's favorite song in Mi Viejo San Juan. And so I would certainly want to relate to the book as much as possible. If the book pertains to music, I would want to play music that is discussed in the book. And so here are the things that I found that could be fourth grade word study or phonics targets. I found those multiple meaning words like record, and I play a record, or he beat the record for the, I don't know, the 600-yard dash, or let's make a recording of you reading, right? And then cool as in temperature, cool as in neat clothes, right as your right versus my right arm versus it was right where you left it, right? So there's a lot of different meanings there. So there's a lot to do. And remember, this book is good for transitioning and up if they're reading it independently. And these are all the things that I might work on, and they're appropriate for transitioning and up. And they're also appropriate for the grade level. And then just like the book that we looked at earlier, the kite book, I have some wonderful verbs in here that I could work on. If I were building vocabulary, I might choose vivid verbs. And then I'm not going to do all of these. I'm going to decide which of these my kids don't know and teach them. And I also could do phrases, descriptive phrases. So I could help them expand their sentences by modifying, not just concert, but first New York concert, not just record, but brand new record, not just beat, but steady conga beat. Okay, and so there's a ton of this in this particular picture book. And so we could look for this in other books that I'll be sharing with you. I can also show them how plural nouns are formed by adding SES and IES, where I have to change the Y to I. I could also show them all these different verb forms, and of course, not all at once, but I could teach them a lot about how English works with this book, because all of this is available to me. And phrasal verbs is something good to work on when kids get to the transitioning and expanding level, because I could teach drop off, drop in, drop over, drop on. He dropped it on my head, right? These all mean different things when I add those different prepositions to the verb drop. So phrasal verbs is something really good to work on as kids gain proficiency. And so you can take a look at this later. And I want you to know all sentence types, we already said that, are in here. Here's a simple sentence, here's a compound sentence. But this particular page that you looked at, it has complex sentences with time clauses. It also lists item in a series, my cool clothes, my favorite toys, and a sketchbook. It does a positives, giving the name of the dog. It does a lot of prepositional phrases. It's not just last day, it's last day of school. It's not just pack a suitcase, it's with my cool clothes, etc. And so it's not just we're off, we were off, and then my dog Daisy and I were off, but where were we off to? We were off to Grandma's apartment in El Barrio. Okay, so all of these are things that extend and expand on the sentence. And I can model all of this. This would be a mentor text page from this book to work on any of the things listed here. And you don't overdo it. Choose something, focus on something, show kids how to do it, and then let them practice that. Okay, so all of picture books gives me a lot of opportunity. So now, if you are an elementary school teacher, I would like you to suggest 2 reading skills that you could practice with this book. And if you're middle level or above, I would like you to suggest 2 reading strategies. And you're just going to put it into the chat box for your colleagues to read. And I'm just going to give you like 2 minutes to suggest, either if you're elementary, a couple reading skills from the chart that I gave you, or a couple reading strategies. sorry, I have to move along now to make sure that I get to show you all the books. So whatever you wrote in the chat box, look at each other's ideas, but certainly there's plenty of reading skills we could practice with this book and plenty of reading strategies. And we also could practice reading fluency with echo reading or whisper reading or paired reading. We could use the read aloud that you were beginning to listen to of this book by Miss Mercedes, and we could echo read along or whisper read while she's reading. We could hit pause and then we could say the same line that she just said for practice. We could do all kinds of follow-up writing. These are just a couple ideas. Cross-culturally, we could talk about extended family relationships and family obligations in Latino families, the importance of Dominican and Puerto Rican music, of sharing music, of storytelling to share personal history, songs of the heart and the homeland, special foods, dressing up for special events, and so forth. And then we might do cognates with this book because there were quite a few words. Remember, the book is in Spanish and in English. And if I was working with kids that knew Spanish and English, we could work across those two languages. Okay, so I have now shown you with this book how I would fill out the entire chart. And you can go back and look at this more carefully after the professional development session is over. It will be on slides. If you have any questions, you'll have my email. You can write to me. This is what we would do for every single book. And I don't have time in our time that we have together today to do this for every book that I'd like to show you. But this is what you would want to do with every book. Make sure that you've listed every possible language and literacy skill that you could teach, and then those cross-cultural and translanguaging possibilities that the book permits you to do. With this book, because it talks about Ismael Rivera and Rafael Cortijo, I would definitely want to have them listen to the music. And of course, it's of the time. And I would play El Bombón de Elena because that happens at the concert, and maybe Moliendo Café because it's kind of a famous song. But you would be the one deciding. And I did play, while you were putting in the skills and strategies, I played you part of El Bombón de Elena. I wanted you to know that many of these books are on Edpuzzle. Someone has already recorded them, or they're on YouTube as a recording and someone has uploaded them. And on Edpuzzle, the teacher adds comprehension questions. This version has 6 questions. This version has 3 questions. This version has 7 questions. And so if you, Edpuzzle is free. You can belong to it, and then you can search for a book by just putting the name of the book in the search box and see what versions exist. And then if you're working remotely with kids, you can assign it. Or if you just want the kids to practice and listen to the book again, you can assign it. And so here is a little video, which I'll play for you, of how we would go about getting things on Edpuzzle.
Want to create amazing video lessons in minutes? Edpuzzle is your missing piece. With Edpuzzle, you can choose from the millions of videos available from YouTube, National Geographic, TED Talks, Khan Academy, and more. You can also reuse ready-to-go video lessons made by other teachers or upload your very own teaching video. Then use Edpuzzle's video editor to create your perfect lesson. Embed your own questions to check your students' understanding, cut sections to show your students only the most important parts of the video, and even record voiceover so you can explain concepts in your own words. Once you've finished, you can assign it to your students in just one click and prevent skipping to make sure your students don't miss a thing. When you want to check in on your students' progress, use Edpuzzle's hassle-free analytics to get all the information you need. See who still needs to watch the video, what your students responded, and their total scores. So remember, with Edpuzzle's free platform, you can make any video your lesson.
Okay, and so I want to highly recommend Edpuzzle to you because you will find a lot of videos there, and it's free. The read alouds, anything that's on YouTube, probably some teachers already put it up with comprehension questions, and then it would just be a question of you selecting the one that you think would work best for your students. So always check there, but you could also re-record. If you don't like their recording, one of the things that happens with books that use the native language, if the person doesn't know how to pronounce the words in the native language, you might not like it, and you might want to re-record it so that you can say the words properly in the language other than English. Okay, I did want you to know that on teaching books, I can find grandma's records. This is a small little picture of that, but I can also find a lot about Eric Velasquez, who wrote this book and illustrated it. He is principally an illustrator, but I do want my kids to know about him, because what if they like to illustrate? You don't just have to be an author to enjoy books. You could be the illustrator. And he wrote another book related to his relationship with his abuelita. And this one is Grandma's Gift. It takes place around Christmas time. And in the story, there's a lot of authentic things, like they make pasteles and so forth. So I wanted you to know that on teachingbooks.net, there are often authors pages in addition to the book pages. And then here, where it says books by Eric Velasquez, you will see the 35 books, most of which he illustrated and was not the author of. But what if the kids want to see more of his illustrations? That's a good way to go too. So I will now show you the remaining picture books, and we're going to go quickly. And we'll just see something for each of the books. I'll show you a little something that you could do with it. But remember that you could take the planner that we looked at with Grandma's Records, and you should fill out the entire planner for every single one of these books. So we're going to see 3 books that represent the Haitian Creole speaking language community, a couple books that represent the Chinese language community, 1 book for the Russian language community, a couple books for the Arabic speaking community, 1 for the Bangla speaking community, and 1 more in Spanish that you probably already know quite a bit about. But I'll be showing you ideas for each book. And remember that these books are included because they do give cross-cultural learning opportunities in every single book. So the first book that we want to look at represents Bangla speakers from Dhaka, which is the capital in Bangladesh. It deals with women's and girls' rights. I could use this in upper elementary and middle level because the kids depicted in this picture book are old enough to work. And it really is for transitioning level kids. So one of the things that I could do here, and we're not gonna read your descriptions, but please do put them in the chat box. I would like you to find these pages that I copied for you, and I copied 3 pages of this book. You won't have time to look at all 3, but I would like you to find some descriptive language, either adjectives and adverbs that are used in the text. And you'll probably just have time to look at this. And while you're looking for some descriptive language, this is oops, I don't want to show you all at once. Okay, never mind. You're looking for things like Abba's rented rickshaw, right? It's a possessive, but then it's not just any old rickshaw, it's a rented rickshaw. Okay, so we want those descriptive phrases. And while you're working, I'll play a little bit of Bangla music. Okay, now thinking about the middle schoolers that I worked with in San Francisco, it could happen that kids, when you play certain type of music, their first reaction is not a positive one, and they find it kind of different, right? And then they might react to it in a way that's unpleasant. So be prepared for that. And before you play anybody's music, make sure that you create a respectful environment for the playing of the music and talk about the music itself so that kids are ready and expecting the music that they're going to hear. If it's novel, if it's the first time they've ever listened to it. And talk about its meanings and its importance so that they understand that it's something that they really need to honor. Okay, but some of the language that you might have found in this page, I already mentioned Abba's rented rickshaw. There's tons and tons of descriptive language in this book. And so it is a way that I could go with this book. But don't forget that every aspect of the planner is something I want to work on, building the background knowledge, working on vocabulary, working on sentence structure, working on reading skills, working on reading strategies. So I'm only able now to show you one thing. I might work on something very prominent that is part of the book, but don't forget to look for all the other things that you could do with this book. And this page continues with a lot of descriptive language. I wanted to show you here too to pay attention in the illustrations to environmental print. And if your kids read the language, to allow them to show off and read the language to kids that don't read this language. Many of the languages of our kids go from right to left rather than left to right. So this is part of the cross-lingual or translanguaging work that you might want to do. There could be symbols that are reflected here that you want them to also understand the importance of the peacock. And so remember that picture books are offering you something, even the domes that exist on the buildings. Like, you want to show as much as you can show about this cultural experience that's represented in this text. And after you show a page such as this page or the one we looked at earlier, you would then ask kids to use this illustration, all of these illustrations, to write adjectival phrases of their own. How could I describe this girl and what she's doing? How could I describe this boat and this man and what he's doing? How could I describe what's going on here? What adjectives and adverbs could I use? What multiple adjectives could I use to describe this boat or this man and how he's working, or this tree? So we want to use the illustrations to prompt language use, not just show and tell. I show it to you. I also want them to do something, and the illustrations allow some practice after we've seen how something works in English. So I could focus on vocabulary development, learning some new adjectives and adverbs, or I could use a page of this book as a mentor text to lead to descriptive writing, such as I just showed you. And for this book, there's a read aloud. It's also in Edpuzzle, and it's on Book Connections. Book Connections and teachingbooks.net are one and the same. So you can either hunt by going to Book Connections or by going to teachingbooks.net. Okay, I don't know why. Sometimes it comes up one way and sometimes it comes up another way. This is a Lee and Low book, and most of the Lee and Low books are written by a culturally diverse author and illustrated by a culturally diverse author. So it's always worth it in the teacher's guide to let kids learn about the author and let kids learn about the illustrator, because this could be very motivating for them. And this is part of what's in the discussion guide. And so here you could think, well, which of these would my students most like to discuss? Remember in this one, well, I didn't really explain it to you. In this story, the girl is not able to be educated. She does not go to school. She's only asked to work. But then by the end of the book, she is allowed to go to school. So this allows us to talk about gender prejudice and whether or not all around the world, girls and boys are able to be educated equally. And so you could talk, well, first you could talk about what it means to be educated. Are you uneducated if you've not gone to school, or could you get an education another way? What do they think? Do all kids have the opportunity to go to school? And do you think it's a right or a privilege? So as they plan, I could play some background music. I just want you to hear a little. and it continues. And in every case where I've given you music, I told you where I got it so you can listen to more if you like it or use it yourself. And then you want students to plan their response, whether oral or written, and then hold the discussion or ask kids to write. So each of you could decide, well, which of these would you choose as the discussion question for your grade level? Which one would be best from your point of view? And so another thing that we can do is in all of these books that are realistic fiction, we can always do the recount or the retell. But we also want to see the social and emotional learning or the support that it could provide to kids that have gone through traumatic experiences. And so we always want to connect these books to our kids' lives and experiences. So this book is a book that would best be used in upper elementary because this is an upper elementary aged boy who, when his mother is hospitalized, has to stay with a neighbor, a close neighbor. And so he's not old enough to stay by himself. And actually, you know, speaking as a mom, I wouldn't let my middle school kids stay alone either. So you have to decide who could you read this book to, what age kids could you read the book to and they would find it interesting. But in terms of the language itself, it's high transitioning in the vocabulary and the structures. And the reason that I might want to read this book now is if any of our kids have had a relative who was ill or hospitalized or, God forbid, didn't make it with COVID, then this book could allow kids to talk about that experience. And so that's called bibliotherapy. It's instead of talking about me and myself, to start the conversation, let's all talk about Raymond and his experience, but I'll really be able to relate to it because I had to stay with a relative. And in my own family, my niece is an oncology nurse, and now she works as a dialysis nurse. And she was on an intubator for 5 weeks, and she's a single mom. And so her son is 12, and he had to stay with his aunt. An aunt had to come and stay with him, and I stayed with him too, because he couldn't be alone. So I think if I read this book with Avery, he would really want to talk a lot about this whole experience. And it lets kids talk about their worry because she comes home and then she has to go back to the hospital. So he's really worried. And this is a great book to read to talk about that experience, or just for kids to have empathy for other kids who did go through that experience. When it comes to language, I could help kids see the vivid verbs that are in here, and I would have to choose certain ones, like which ones will I choose to work on? I can't do them all, but then I could have them practice using a verb and an adverb. So that the people passed by briskly, or the flower sprouted, it finally sprouted, or it suddenly sprouted, right? So these are all ones that I could put together and then show kids where I can place the adverb in the sentence with the verb. And I can show them how it modifies the verb. So that's a good one that I could practice with this book. And it comes with a teacher's guide with lots of teaching ideas. It's also on teachingbooks.net. And that's all I wanted to say about that book, but it is a great book to use with my transitioning kids and up, and especially to talk about this experience of a single parent household and what would happen if something happened to your parent, what other wonderful adults would come and be in your life and make sure that you were well taken care of. So this book, Calling the Water Drum Home, is one that represents the Haitian refugee experience. And in this book, sadly, this boy loses both his mother and father at sea, and he witnesses it. So this is a tough book, right? The content of this book is tough to talk about, but you might need to talk about it. And this book is also transitioning, low transitioning and above. And so here, this boy has to go and live with his uncle, but that becomes then his permanent home. And here in the illustrations, this book allows us to see his environment when he was living in Haiti and with his parents, and what the pail meant to him when he was in Haiti living with his mom and his dad. This shows the beginning of them boarding boats to leave Haiti to escape. And then this is his later life when he's now living with his uncle in New York City in an urban environment. And so here I could play music while they're writing. I could play music like this because the water drum, which is actually this pail, becomes quite important. And so I might want to have music like this. Okay, and it continues with different beats. But why the beat is important in this story is because he's completely displaced and has to live in a new family with his uncle. And he holds on to this pail because it means so much to him. And he's really missing his mother and father and his original home. And he's caught between languages and he doesn't want to speak at all. So he says, I had no words for anyone. Nothing in Creole and nothing in this English that my uncle tried to teach me. So the friend, the little girl that was in the picture, Corinne, took her bucket and tapped its side, 1 for yes and 2 for no. And that's how they start communicating with one another. So this bucket, this drum is like super important. And Corinne also lost her father, but in a hurricane. So they really share that sense of loss. And again, this gives kids opportunities to talk and write about really difficult experiences. It's not all happiness and sunshine and light, right? For kids that have come as refugees or immigrants or migrants. And so we want to be able to talk about all kinds of experiences that they've had in sensitive ways. And these books allow us to do that, whether it's illness or whether it's loss. There is a read aloud for this book. There's a teacher's guide for this book, and it helps teachers talk about grief and loss. And you might want to work with a counselor to enter this conversation. Okay, so another book I wanted you to know about is Shanghai Messenger. And this is the story of a biracial Chinese American girl. The father is American and the mother is Chinese. And this tells the story of Xiao Mei, speaking with Nai Nai, her grandmother, and she is invited to go to Shanghai, China. She's old enough to go. She's 11 years old and she's going to travel by herself, and she does. And then it talks about her experience learning about her Chinese heritage and the time that she spends in Shanghai. And Nai Nai asks her to please, you will be my messenger. Look everything, remember. So this kind of shows dialectical English as spoken by someone learning English. And Nai Nai is saying, look everything instead of look at everything. And she wants her granddaughter to remember everything and please come home and let us know what you experienced. So this is a beautiful little book. And it's laid out like this. Now remember, in traditional Chinese, the writing goes from top to bottom. It goes from the back of the book to the front of the book. It's not like that anymore. It goes left to right now, but it used to go right to left and top to bottom in traditional Chinese. And so in this, I've given you these 2 pages. The one about the letter where she's invited, the yes or no, where she has to decide if she's going to go. She expresses her reservations because she doesn't know if people will stare at her because her eyes are with green flecks like her father's, and she looks a little bit like her father and a little bit like her mother. She's not 100% Chinese. She doesn't know if she'll be accepted as a biracial child. And then it goes on to talk about the dinner and the grandmother explaining the family tree before she leaves, and her younger brother kind of saying, well, why can't I go? And then it's explained you're not old enough. So this idea of coming of age. And what I'd like you to do with any page or any entry, just look at one entry. I'd like you to see if you can notice some cross-cultural learning targets and some trans-language possibilities that are offered by this book. And I'm only going to be able to give you a couple minutes, like 2 minutes, but I'll play some music while you're looking. So please look either for cross-cultural things you could teach kids or translanguaging possibilities. Okay, and so some of the things that I noticed that you might have noticed is this idea of being the eldest, being of age for travel alone, family obligations of the grandmother, of the aunts, of the uncle, of the child, prized dishes, the idea of if you read a particular one, it talked about writing beautifully, writing carefully, and that is highly valued, and the importance of the extended family and family lineage. And if you look for translanguaging, it was mostly the names of people or locations, but there were some Chinese discussion of Chinese characters and the orthography of Chinese. So these would be things that we could talk about. And so remember, that's part of our form to look for those things. This one is on teachingbooks.net. And also sometimes on teachingbooks.net, they offer you cross-cultural learning suggestions to reflect on the cultural representations in the characters, settings, and events, and to compare it for the children to compare it to their own experience. Okay, so how this child looks in relation to how they look, what they do with their aunts and uncles, and what she does with her aunts and uncles, and so forth. And then I also wanted to mention something that I got from TESOL this year. It just happened in March. And a particular person studied this as her doctoral dissertation to look at why authors use translanguaging in their texts. And I thought this might interest you. One reason that they use the two languages in the text is to share their language and their cultural background with readers, or to connect with them. If I share your language and culture, I'm trying to connect with you by using our shared language and our shared culture. Or I might do it because I want to show my full linguistic repertoire. I don't just speak English, I also speak Chinese, and I'm going to prove it to you because I'm going to use it in my writing. Or maybe I'll help readers that don't know the other language understand the meaning of the words and phrases that I choose to use in the language other than English by using pictures that show what the word means, or maybe I'll give the word in both languages as a multilingual context clue. Okay, so when I'm working with bilingual or dual language kids, I want to talk to them about using translanguaging in their texts and in their writing, and why we do it and when we would do it and how to do it in the most effective way, understanding that some readers won't know the two languages and we have to help them. So this was the work of Carolina Rosato de Almeida. And recently in 2018, she took on this study as her doctoral work. All of these books that are on your list, including Grandma's Records, and some that you haven't seen yet, have translanguaging possibilities. So you can come back to this slide to catch up with that later. So now in the last minutes that we have, I want to mention an author that you probably already know a lot about, Patricia Polacco, who's Russian American. And this book, The Keeping Quilt, it's actually been around a long time. I think she wrote it in the late 80s. I just want to show you a minute of her talking about how she got the idea for this book. She shares her memories of the quilt that makes up the story of the keeping quilt.
So every night before I go to sleep, and this is the quilt, by the way. This is the real keeping quilt. It's not in terribly good shape. It has been around, probably the oldest piece is on here, about 150 years. The original babushka that was around the edge of this is gone. It literally disintegrated off. What you see here now is an American gingham. But if you look at this edge, it's literally disappearing. It's tearing and shredding, especially this edge. But when I was little, this quilt was on my bed. I always slept with the yellow horse here by my face. And every night before I go to sleep, I'd run my fingers around the edge of this horse. Do you know, touching this horse now, I know we're making a film, but I can hear my grandmother's voice as if she's in this room every time I touch this. I haven't heard her voice for over 62 years. But she'd sit on the edge of the bed and pull these up in front of my face and say, "Trisha, whose dress make this?" I'd say, "Well, that's Aunt Havela's apron." "Yes." "Whose shirt is this?" "That's Uncle Vladimir's shirt." I mean, she had me name all of these people, and I can name them to this day. I see them through her heart, and I never knew them. She would always end, though, "Trisha, whose dress is the blue?" That's when I'd say, "Well, that's Anna. That's my great-grandma. That was her dress when she came all the way from Russia. That's the dress she was wearing." "Yes," my grandmother would say. Of course, what I'm going to tell you next,
Okay. Unfortunately, we're not going to get to hear all of it. And there's another video that, unfortunately, because of time right now, you're going to have to listen to it later, excuse me. But if you listen to this video on the keeping quilt, you will hear Russian experiences, immigrant experiences that are very, very common. It's a read aloud of the story, but it talks about things like learning English and feeling like you have pebbles in your mouth and having to translate for your parents and other things like that. So I could do either of these as a listening for main ideas experience with my students. And I wanted to show you at least 1 or 2 listening activities with these books. So you want them to listen, but then get ready to speak or write, or learn some new vocabulary, or learn some new sentence structure. So we want to work on all of that. And this book, because it's been around, is part of Wit and Wisdom, but it's at the 3rd grade. It's part of a unit called A New Home. And it's also in the 4th grade in the unit on oral tradition, symbolism, and building community. And this is an activity, a note catcher activity from the unit where they have to say, what did you learn from the text? And what did you learn from the illustrations? So I learned that the quilt was made of scraps of clothing. I learned that gold means wealth and flour means love and salt means flavor, the symbolism. And I also learned that this family, that the story takes place in the past and that this family lives in the city. Okay, so I just wanted you to see the connection to these 2 curricula, because it could be that you're using either Wit and Wisdom or Expeditionary Learning as your ELA curriculum. And there are so many resources for this book, you'll just get inundated with resources. Don't forget to look everywhere for the types of things that you might find. And you look on Edpuzzle, look on Nearpod, look everywhere, because it's going to be everywhere, because this book has been around a good long time and people love this author. And I did want to mention that this connects with a topic we'll talk about next time, artifactual literacy, because the quilt is an artifact, yet it promoted literacy. It promoted the writing of this book and the illustrating of this book and all the conversations we can have around the book. So we could play instrumental music. I have to let you listen to at least a second of this. Okay, and while kids are working, they could be listening, right? We're putting them in the mood. We're putting them in the environment. Don't forget about using music, especially when kids are working, because what else is happening? Nothing. silence. But you have to make sure it's instrumental music. And before I forget it, all those books that have translanguaging possibilities, most come with a glossary or some explanation of the native language words somewhere in the book. This is also a Reading is Fundamental book. You're just going to find this book everywhere. It's just very, very popular. So let's see a few more books before we end. This one is represents Haitian culture. This is best, I think, because it's an elementary aged character. It fits best there. But oh, I'm sorry, it says developing. That's the word we use in Rhode Island. But transitioning is your word. Transition. This is transitioning and up. Okay. So here, I wanted you to hear a cute little song that goes along. This is a tap tap. That's what this vehicle is called in Haiti. And so I want you to hear a cute little song about a tap tap that I found on Vimeo.
The more upon the tap, the ride will be great. Baby, sit on mama's lap like little man, he takes a nap. Boys and girls, they sing and clap. Woman holds a basket upon her strap. Strap. Ooh. Everybody, ride upon the tap. Everybody, give a little clap. Everybody, ride upon the tap. Everybody, give a little clap. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Tap doesn't go if there isn't any more. You go 5, 6, 7, 8. The more upon the tap, the ride will be great. Mama puts her orange in this set. Bus driver's money goes clickety clack. Man carries table on his back. Woman she buys a little cat. Sack, clap. Oh.
Okay, it's the cutest song. I hope you get to listen to all of it. So in this one, we could either work with the text as mentor text and teach something about how English works, let's say past tense, regular and irregular, past tense or future tense. So all of these books offer us language possibilities, and we just have to decide, what am I going to pull out and help the kids with? But then I can also use the illustrations for later writing, and I can just take this picture without any text being shown and have them write about what they learned about this little girl and her mother the day that they went to market. And she wanted to ride on the tap, but they walked on the way over, and then they rode on the way back on the tap. So another thing that I can do is just select illustrations like this for any child or any learner who has experienced an outdoor market, even the outdoor markets in New York City. We could write about that the experience we've all had with outdoor markets, and we can make our own illustrations, or we can find illustrations. And this could be a theme, outdoor markets. And then we could work on certain language and literacy aspects as we use this book. I want you to always look on the inside covers, because often there's beautiful illustrations like this. And I think a lot of your kids that come out of the Caribbean and places, tropical places, would find this illustration very motivating to write about. It would trigger memories. And so we always want to look at the covers, the inside covers, and the page illustrations as prompts for speaking and prompts for writing. But then when they speak and when they write, we need to stretch them. Don't just let them say what they say, stretch them and offer them either new words or new phrases or new modifiers, something different that they can add to their existing repertoire. This comes with a teacher's guide, and it tells you other themes that you could work on: jobs or determination, persistence, problem solving, transportation, and links to the different subject areas like social studies, science, and math and art. It's in teachingbooks.net, and it's a YouTube video, and it's probably also, I forgot to look, but it's probably also on Edpuzzle. So the last thing that I want to show you is how any of our texts could offer us prompts, either a provocative question we want to ask, such as we asked about I'm sorry, Yasmin's hammer, like should girls be able to go to school, or is that just something boys should be allowed to do? We saw some prompts with that book, but now we want to think about quotes that we could take out of our books and use as a prompt for speaking or for writing. So this book, The Arabic Quilt, I'm going to have to tell you the story. I'll play a tiny little bit. It's an Egyptian family, and it starts with them enjoying traditional foods at home. And then it goes to this girl is going to school, and I'll let you listen to a little bit of the story.
At lunchtime, Kanzi is surprised when Mama walks through the door. Habibti, you forgot your lunchbox. Habibti? Like the Hobbit? Isn't your name Kanzi? Molly snickers. Her classmates laugh with her as they walk to the cafeteria. Mrs. Hogan sees tears rolling down Kanzi's cheeks. What's wrong? She asks. Molly made fun of what my mama said, Kanzi replies. That night, as Mama puts leftover Schubert ads in Kanzi's lunchbox, Kanzi gently pats Mama's back. Can you please pack me a turkey sandwich instead? Before bed, Kanzi writes a poem as she hugs her quilt, which smells like Tata's home. The next day, Molly says, Miss Hogan said I hurt your feelings. I'm sorry I laughed at your mom's language. It sounded funny. It may sound funny to you, but that is only because you don't speak Arabic, Kanzi says. She feels a lump forming in her throat. My parents say that learning different languages makes a person smarter and kinder, she blurts out. Okay, whatever, Molly says, skipping away. Mrs. Hogan calls
Okay,
Kanzi at her
I'm not
desk
going to
after
be able to
lunch.
continue
I found
because
this note.
we're out of time, but later that same little girl rejects the fact that she's speaking Arabic and kind of puts down the speaking of Arabic. So this book lets you talk about discrimination and the discrimination that kids experience about their language and about their culture. And so when she's called Habiti, it's beautiful. It's my love, like uh, any term of endearment in any language that we use, like mi amor, right? Like I don't just call you by your name, I also call you by the terms of endearment that we have, that we show each other that we love one another. And so this is a really good book for talking about cultures bumping into one another and kids not respecting other languages and not respecting um, the the words that come from those languages. So in this book, which would best be used in grades 4 and 5 because of the illustration showing elementary age kids, it is high emerging. And look, at I said developing again. I'm sorry, it's so ingrained. Low transitioning. I'll fix this before I post it. There are two quotes in here that are beautiful. One that you just heard, and later it says, aren't languages a beautiful thing? They can truly unite us. Because what happens in this book is her mother comes to school, writes all the children's names in Arabic, and they make a quilt of their names. And then all of the kids love Arabic because they love their piece of the quilt that says their name in Arabic. So one of the things we want to do with prompts is offer choice, not force them to write about one or the other. Give several choices, let them write or speak about the one that they can most relate to. And this too has resources on teachingbooks.net. Another book I wanted to show you is The Scar in Majeda's Sky. And this is about a grandfather, an Arabic speaking grandfather who comes from the Middle East to visit with his grandson. They spend a lot of time together. And then it's time for Jeddah to leave, and Alex doesn't want to say goodbye. And then the grandfather says this quote to Alex: your sky, your moon, your stars are mine too, Habibi, my dear. And as you look up, my thoughts will fly to you. So he teaches him that they can both look at the sky from their own home countries and feel connected around a constellation that the grandfather teaches him to look at. And again, here's this word, my love, my dear. And so how grandfathers refer, how grandmothers refer to their grandchildren, or how parents relate to their children. Okay, using native language words. I'm not going to say that in English. I'm going to say it in my native language. Um, and this happens in many languages. Now, one of the disappointments of this book, to just say it up front, is I found no videos for this book. So one of you needs to make a recording of the book in Edpuzzle, or record it on Seesaw or Flipgrid or YouTube, and then post it on YouTube and upload it into Nearpod and upload it into Edpuzzle. It's a wonderful book, and it's just a shame that more people are not using it. So here I wanted to show you, what if I don't know, and I certainly didn't know, I don't speak Arabic, how to say Jada. I hope I'm saying it okay. So I could go to Word Hippo. I can put the word in English, and then it will say the word in Arabic, and I can click on this little sound icon and it will say the word out loud so I can see how to say it. And the last, I started with Francie Latour. I'm ending with Francie Latour. She offered us Auntie Luce's talking paintings. This is good for high transitioning. I kept using developing, so sorry, and low expanding. And it's a realistic fiction book. Look at these wonderful, wonderful illustrations. They're just everywhere in the book. And I can cause a lot of language to be learned just using the illustrations, but also the text. And here, I wanted to show you this idea of the dynamic in betweenness that some kids feel, like when they're in New York, people call them Puerto Rican, and when they're in Puerto Rico, they're told they're not really fully Puerto Rican because they grew up in New York. That can happen. Okay, so this girl feels not Haitian enough when she's in Haiti, and then when she doesn't feel American enough either. She's kind of in between, and the aunt says to her, try not to think of it as one or the other, but both together. And then says this beautiful line, you hold this place in your skin, deep in your bones, and colors do not lie. And so the aunt is a painter and she paints her. And so it's just the most beautiful, beautiful story. And the last quote in the book is, these colors, this people, this place belongs to you, and you belong to them always. And remember, we talked about that idea of belonging. So I also wanted to mention, for those of you using this picture book that's part of Engage New York, sorry, this novel, this chapter book, that I could give either prompts or book quotes with this as well. So when I am using a chapter book or a novel, these techniques that I'm offering you with the picture books will also work with the chapter book. They just lack the illustrations. I don't have enough illustrations when I'm using a chapter book or a novel. So I could make in Padlet a quote or a prompt wall using any of these, or I could upload a picture, a book illustration as a prompt, then kids could be given a writing task or a speaking task. And now it is possible in Padlet to make a video or an audio. So I can ask for them, if I provide them with an illustration, that I can ask for them to do an audio or a video and upload it into Padlet and then submit it. So the last part, if you'll spare me the 2 minutes, are resources for you. All of the book titles, I've given you the link to the publisher if possible, or to Amazon if the publisher did not have a good link. These are the links to the distance learning tools that we saw today. Remember that when you add the world music, be sure to find only instrumental and only royalty-free music. Otherwise, you're violating copyright. I gave you on the Padlet more criteria about selecting books in addition to the checklist that we took a look at. I gave you an article on No Longer Invisible, how diverse literature helps children find themselves in books and why it matters. And I wanted to remind you of Jane Fleming's book, More Mirrors in the Classroom, tell you what some of the chapters are all about. She has a chapter on guidelines for text selection, and don't forget her website, because she has loaded a ton of culturally responsive picture books onto her website, Kids Like Us. And then Lee and Low offers you teaching guides, don't forget. And there's also, if you would like to record one of their books on YouTube, they give you guidelines for how to do that during COVID-19. And that's it. I will see you on May 8th when we will do informational picture books for all of the groups that we talked about today and one or two more. And we'll do mostly biographies, but I will give one example of how to have a culturally responsive informational text when you're studying a topic such as protecting the world species, or and I'll show you some artifactual literacy examples. So we hope to see you all again on May 8th. Thank you so much for giving up your morning. It's the most beautiful day, so please go and enjoy some sunshine. I will read the chat if you want to put anything in there. We've told you throughout today's presentation who and the URL, we'll put it one more time, to contact if you haven't been getting your CTLEs, or how to get the CTLEs for today. So, Antoine, if you don't mind putting that in one last time, this is how you can contact me. We will post this PowerPoint within a matter of days next week, and the recording will also be there. And I hope that some of what we looked at today will be useful to you as you work with your students. Thank you so much for giving up your morning.